All right, we got an excellent crowd out here tonight. Thanks everybody for coming to join us. So we're gonna go over the Grunfeld Defense, especially from White's point of view tonight. And the last person to request this was the Dark Crazy Cyborg. So for you, here it is. This is the Grunfeld. Okay, the game begins with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and okay, there's more than one move here, but knight to c3 is the most principled. The point is we're just going to play e4 next move if they allow it. So here's the big choice Black gets to make. Is he going to play bishop to g7? Is he going to be a King's Indian? Or is he going to play the move we're going to look at tonight, d5? And this is the Grunfeld Defense. It's a very interesting opening. It's very sharp. It's highly theoretical, and there's lots of complications. And there's all sorts of lines that White can pick. So there's perfectly good moves here. Knight f3 is good, bishop f4, bishop g5. All of these moves make a lot of sense. But I think the most principled way is to play the exchanged variation, which is what we're going to look at tonight. And as the name indicates, it involves an exchange on d5. And why this is so logical is because when you have a chance to trade a side pawn for a central pawn, and they have to take back with a piece rather than a pawn, generally, it's a good positional idea to make this exchange. And Black will take back, and now White gets the chance to get a really big center. Bishop to d2 is also a move here. It used to be kind of a sideline, but it's really gaining in popularity. But tonight we'll be looking at the most logical move, which is just e4, establishing the big pawn center. And Black really should trade here. It doesn't make much sense to go to b6 or move the knight back to f6, because he's going to have a lot less space. Black in this opening is giving up space in the hopes that he can create a lot of pressure in the center. So when you have less space, you want to trade a piece or two. So here, Black should trade. And now we get sort of the very starting position for this opening. So you'll notice the big obvious trump for White is this huge pawn center, which controls a whole lot of squares. You'll notice Black's going to have a hard time putting anything on the 5th rank. White has tons of control. But what is Black going to get? Well, he's going to get a lot of dynamic pressure. And the big focal point for him is going to be the d4 square. So he can play moves like bishop to g6, c5, knight c6. And you'll see he's starting to really ramp up the pressure on White's center. So White, over the next few moves, he's just going to try to consolidate, keep his center. And Black's going to try to undermine it and try to get some counterplay going. And there's a interesting move that I like to play in this position, and in this position here, and that's bishop to c4, which is the move that we're going to be talking about tonight. But you might be thinking, well, why not knight to f3? Certainly, this looks like the most logical move you could make. You put the knight on the best square. It's defending d4, and you might be surprised to learn that this move actually was not considered very highly. It was thought to be a mistake a while back, but in more modern times, they've kind of found ways to make this move work. And the reason it wasn't so highly thought of is because Black can play bishop to g4 and exchange one of the defenders of the d4 square. For example, if White plays a little too casually, Black gets to attack the center, and we'll play just a little bit casually here, and we'll keep defending, and ultimately what's going to happen is he's going to take your knight, which is one of your defenders of d4, which means here you already have a kind of a conundrum. So you know that your knight's about to fall, and if that falls, then d4 is going to fall in this position. So you'd have to play a move like e5, which positionally you really don't want to do. Here you're giving up a lot of the light squares all around the center, which he'll be able to use for some of his pieces. So you want to be able to keep your pawns on d4 and e4, at least for the time being, until you've castled and you can play f4 and you can do a big storm on the king side. So, if you play a little bit too casually here, you might have to take on a really bad position. But people have, over the years, they figured out how to play this. And so one of the main lines in the modern way to play this position is the move rook to b1. So rook to b1 puts pressure on the b7 pawn, making it harder for you to move your bishop away, because then your pawn would fall. Though it is often involving a sacrifice, because at some point black can take on d5, and then play the move queen to a5, attacking your king and the pawn on a2. So this line often involves a sacrifice, and we'll just show a brief example of how this might happen. We can see in this position, so black has taken the a2 pawn. And this is a very common theme. Very often black will try to grab it, usually with the queen, but there's some lines where you can grab the pawn with a bishop. Sometimes this bishop goes here, and then it goes and grabs the a2 pawn. And then white gets an initiative for the pawn. And usually these are very critical lines, and we'll just go a couple more moves here. And you can see in a position like this, white has the center. He has all of his pieces out. Black hasn't touched his queenside pieces yet, but he is up a pawn. Will black be able to consolidate and ever make use of his majority over here? He's got 2 on 0. So this is probably the most common way now. It's a very testing way to play. So if you're playing this with black, you really better know that line. But today I'm going to be focusing on bishop to c4. This is how I've always approached this position. And I think the fact that this has now kind of become the older line kind of makes it worth learning now, because people might not know it. They're focusing on the pawn sack lines. And what was used to be old is now new again because people aren't playing it. So it gives you an advantage if you play it and they don't know what they're doing. But it's still a very critical line, so I think most black players that are prepared in this line will have a good understanding of this move. So we'll check it out. And the key point is, now the knight is not going to go to f3. The knight is going to go to e2, where if you ever play bishop to g4, we can play f3 and kick your bishop away. So that's what we'll focus on. Now there's 2 moves here. You can castle, which will likely transpose to the game we're going to check out today. Or you can play the move c5, which is the most flexible. You have an extra option here with black that we'll check out, rather than if you just castled immediately. So white's point was he was going to put his knight on e2. And it's important to keep count of how many times your d4 pawn is attacked. So you'll notice in this position, it's attacked 3 times, and it's defended 3 times. So castling would again transpose to what we're going to see in just a second. But I want to point out one variation that can occur if he avoids castling for a while. So he attacks it again, so you need to defend it again. And it's funny, I was teaching a kid, and he was having a hard time understanding. Sometimes things are attacked once, sometimes they're attacked twice. So I showed him this possession, and I had him count how many times is the d4 pawn attacked. And it was really tough for him. He's about 5 or 6. It was really hard to see because it's attacked a lot of times. So you have to be good at math and good at counting to be able to play this variation. So it is attacked 4 times, which is not something you see in a lot of openings. And it's only defended 3 times, so we need to defend it again. All right. Now castling again would lead us to the positions we're going to look at tonight. But there is one additional option that black can play here, and that is queen to a5 before white has been castled. So now you're in check, and you got to figure out how you're going to get out of this. And the main line is queen d2, followed, it's bishop d2. We'll look at queen d2 in just a second. Bishop d2 attacking the queen, and several games go like this. And then you do this, and then you do this, and then you make a draw. So there's quite a lot of games when high-rated players, they want to make a draw, and they're not in a fighting mood. Okay, this is one really easy way to try to make a draw. So if you are playing this way as white, you might need to make a concession if you want to keep playing here for a win, which is one reason why some people might be turned off of playing this variation as white. If a draw is fine with you, then this is a perfectly acceptable way to play. But we'll see. And I think there is some interesting ways to try to get out of here. One move is queen to d2. This is probably not the most testing way to try to fight for a win, because the resulting endgame after black trades is relatively equal. For example, black will castle, planning to put a rook on the d file, so you can protect in time and back up. And white probably has a very, very slight advantage here in this endgame, but it's not a whole lot. You do have the center. You have relatively nicely placed pieces. Black will continue with his normal plan of development in these positions, which is to reroute some of his pieces to the c4 square, which we'll be seeing a whole lot of today. So this probably isn't the greatest way to play for an advantage. So what other ways are possible here? Let's see, let's back up all the way so that it gets it. All right. So there is a different way that white can play for a more complicated game in this position. So instead of repeating by putting the bishop back on e3, the game between Kramnik and Svidler from 1998 saw a different move, d5. And this is, okay, this is quite an anti-positional move, but it's a very tricky one. And both players would, it's not a very common way. So I think that's also, it's a good move to look at. This is a great game to study if you're trying to avoid the draw here, because it's not a move white really wants to play. We are giving up some dark squares, so the pieces will get to go there. But there are some tricky ways that we can continue. So the bishop is attacked, but white's tactical point here is bishop to c3. And all right, so you can't take my bishop because I'll take your bishop on g7, attacking your rook. So black can castle, defend his bishop. Now the bishop is really hanging on c4, so we can back it up. And white intends soon just to play the move f4 and start rolling his center forward. In this game, Svidler decided to play queen to b6. And so we see this move, and black got to threaten checkmate, or at least a really big check. Okay, so what should be done? White should probably stop that. So bishop to d4 was played. And in these lines, usually this is one of black's greatest pieces. So it is a piece that he does want to hang on to for as long as possible, because it is on an excellent diagonal. So whenever white gets the chance to exchange this bishop, it's usually in his best interest. And here, Svidler decided to go into an endgame. Though we will see in this endgame, the white king is in the center. Will black be able to put enough pressure on the center, open up some files, and start attacking the king? Well, that's not what happened in the game. And after the move e5, trying to preserve the bishop on g7, Kramnik played a really excellent move here. So this move I really like. Most people, I think, would either take on e5 or move their bishop. But the move h3 was played. So a very nice move after the bishop was traded. Eventually the g4 pawn is going to fall. And will white's pawns eventually march up the board? And that's what happened in the game. G5 is an interesting attempt. So if this pawn does move, either forward or taking the pawn, you're giving up the e5 square. So this was protected. And this isn't the focus of the day, so we'll get to the good parts here. And so he got his... eventually what happened was these pawns began to roll. And now black is actually completely lost now in this position. The pawns are just too strong. And in this position, you can pause your video if you want to find it. There's a nice little tactical move that was played here. Bishop takes h7. If you take the bishop, then d7 followed by queening will win the game. So black gave it up here. And it's a bit unfair to do a Grunfeld lecture, and the only game with Svidler we show is him losing, because he's, if you are playing this as black, he should be your guide. He is very well known for playing this opening, and he's won quite a lot of very nice victories. But in a bit of an injustice, we'll show only one game that he lost. Okay, we'll back up. We'll get back to our main line here. So in the game, we didn't see the knight to c6 followed by trading on d4. Both sides castled. All right. So black will continue putting pressure on the center, and it will be white's job to defend. All right. And now there's another big parting of the ways. So we'll give you a second just to refresh yourself on this position. And the main move here is bishop to g4, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Also possible is queen to c7. So this has also been played a lot. Though in my experience, I've had this position several times in tournament games. So if you play in the St. Louis area, I'm pretty sure your opponent's going to play bishop to g4, because that's what I always face in this position. But queen to c7 is possible. One of the benefits is now you're going to put a rook on the d file. So the fact that you'll have a rook on the same file as a queen, that might be quite useful. And your queen is on the same file here as the bishop. So you are threatening to get all those pieces out of the way. you can start taking, and then the knight can take back, and you'll expose an attack on the bishop. So white must be really careful here. And in general, this rook, he's either going to a1 or c1 in these lines here. So rook c1 makes a lot of sense. Now, if there's a trade on d4, the bishop will be protected. All right, so this was the point. And there's more than one way white can play here. You can just play queen d2 and rook to d1. That's a perfectly acceptable way to play. The most common way is actually to play bishop to f4, where black has tried a couple different things. You can play e5. You can even play bishop to e5. And Svidler's won a good game in this variation as black. So if Svidler's used this move, even though it's not very popular, it is worth looking at if you're interested. But also possible is queen to d7, attacking d4 an innumerable amount of times. So he's attacking that pawn with everything. So yeah, you need a whole hand to count how many times d4 is attacked, which means white is going to be forced to make a concession in the center. And after some position like this, you'll get an endgame where black's plan is to play b5, c4, and maneuver his knight back around to look into some of these light squares over here. So a very interesting way to play, but today we're going to focus on the main move here, which is bishop to g4. So he is hoping to provoke f3, so okay. And now you might be thinking, what are you going to do with this bishop? There's not really a great place to retreat the bishop. I mean, you can go back to e6 and accept doubled pawns. Bishop d7 is probably okay. You probably don't want to go all the way back. But black's intention here is to tactically use his next move to continue playing, to move this bishop out of the way. So knight to a5 here is the main move. And again, white has two moves here. So normally, when you have a threat and your opponent has a threat, the best response is just to move your bishop out of the way, which is why we're going to look at the main move, bishop to d3. Because now your opponent has to respond to your threat, so he'll have to move this bishop out of the way, and then it'll be your turn to do something and use your initiative. It is possible to win a pawn here. So perhaps you're thinking tactically, can't I just take this pawn and then take this bishop? So you want a pawn. But this is not thought to be the most testing variation. It's not thought very highly of because black does end up getting a lot of activity, though it is a playable line, so you can consider playing this way. Black will normally consider taking here, and you basically have to take back with the king. If you take back with the queen, you can get into a little bit of trouble with a move like knight to c4. So we see the knight coming to c4. That's one of the squares he's always looking at in this variation. And either your queen has to defend your dark squared bishop, otherwise, and let black take it, or you can play here and blunder your e-pawn. Because after a move like this, this is not why you tried to win a pawn here, just to let him win it back and get a very nice position here. So you need to take back with the king. That's important to remember here. And there's more than one way black can play, but the most common is trading and playing the move e5. So you don't have to push here, but okay, pushing is possible. And just to show you an example of how black can get very active pieces in this line, we'll look at queen to c4, attacking the bishop, followed by piling up on the f-file. And as you can see, black does get quite a lot of pressure, and all you get this extra g-pawn, which might be useful in the future, but it's kind of known that this line is very nice for black. It is kind of even, so you can play this way, but more common, if we back all the way up, is not to take on f7. It's to play bishop to d3. Okay, now that the bishop's moved, he can trade and play bishop to e6. Now, we'll see that he's got two pieces looking here at c4. And the problem for white now is the only way he can take control over c4 in any reasonable way is to sacrifice some material. So we're going to be looking at the main move, which is d5, which obviously sacrifices the exchange on a1. But to try to understand that, let's look at what if we instead try to control c4 with our rook. Obviously, this is a pawn sacrifice, and black should probably be willing to take it. And let's see, is white going to be able to get enough for the pawn that he sacrificed? For example, queen to a4, and he does eventually get the move d5 in. Okay, so we reach a position like this. Black is a pawn up. He does have, a decent center and some nice pieces, but black has a good way of playing here. There's two ways. Probably the best is e6, because if b6 with the intention of bringing your knight back to one of these dark squares, white can actually meet this with bishop to a6, preventing knight to b7 and preventing you from ever, putting a rook here. But he doesn't need to play this way. e6 gives black a very nice game after this sample continuation, not the only one, but okay, a position like this, black is up a pawn, and it's not so obvious that white has complete compensation for it. So this is not the way that they normally play. And you may be thinking, if we back up to this position, so if instead of rook to c1, what if instead we play queen to a4, with the idea that now we're going to play rook to c1 and our pawn is already protected. But this line is even worse than the last one because black has the strong move a6. The idea is to play b5, getting even more control over c4. So now if you play rook to c1, you're in bad shape after b5, because if you try to stay connected to your a pawn here, knight to c4 is a very annoying move. And if you have to take this, you're still in a little bit of trouble. Now your knight is under attack, and if you defend it, black can win a pawn here by taking your knight and then taking on d4. So notice, even if you play a move like rook to d2, attacking a pinned piece, he can always take on e3 with check to get himself out of trouble. So here black is just truly up a pawn, and white doesn't have any compensation. So that's why when you do reach this position, people play the move d5. Okay, so black should probably grab this material, and okay, white should take back. And now again, it's there's some little bit of tactics going on. White is not really thinking of taking this bishop yet, so black can leave it hanging there, because the bishop on d3 would be exposed if you played d takes e6. So the most common move here is to start defending the dark squares to guard against these possible threats here with a move like f6. Okay, and now we're going to be looking at the game Topalov-Shirov from Linares in 2008. And that game saw something that was not the main line, but I think it's a very nice way to play. And that's just with bishop to d4, defending your bishops, so you are threatening to take on e6. But the main line, which is a very exciting line, is bishop to h6, threatening to just win back the exchange. So black normally moves it, and we'll get a good glimpse here of how crazy some of these lines can be. But the reason people don't play these lines as much is because it's all been worked out to a draw. But it's a very complicated and crazy draw. Now in a lot of lines, black is thinking about playing queen to b6. So white can't play a move like bishop to b5 here because he would lose a piece. So normally he gets off of that diagonal. And okay, so now black is thinking, I'm going to put something on c4. And now the knight comes in. So this is starting to look a little bit dangerous. So some people like to play this way as black. You're up in exchange. But a lot of attackers are coming near your king here. So what's going to happen? So the bishop is attacked, and it will normally go to d7. And the reason is, okay, we might in the future maneuver the bishop to c2 to try to trade for one of white's attacking pieces here. And now white plays e5. So if you're not prepared, this is pretty scary. All of white's pieces here are doing a great job. So these are all pretty scary pieces to have near your king. And it's not so easy to put any defenders directly by your king. So what's going to happen? Well, the knight comes into c4, attacking the e-pawn. e6. All right. And so he's getting ready to, play moves like knight to e5. and bishop to c2. And white here can go all in for the attack. He can sacrifice on g6. So this is scary. You know, if you don't know this position, you see these bishops right by your king. It's pretty nerve-wracking. So you do need to have sort of nerves of steel if you're going to play this way as black, because you're really playing with fire. If black doesn't play accurately enough, he could very easily find himself checkmated. And he has to play very, very precisely in order to make a draw here. But, okay. Knight to e5. White better not think about just grabbing the exchange here because you are down material, so that won't help you any. So he's got to, you know, keep his bishop alive so the attack can continue. But now bishop to c2. And after this trade, queen to d1. And if white were gifted just one more move, if he could play the move f4 here, he would have a totally winning position. But black is just in time here with one of either two moves. Queen to c7 is a playable move here, but king to h7 has also been worked out to a draw. For example, taking on c2 leads to a draw, as does f4. And we'll look at one line here. So you'll notice there's several lines that could play here, and it looks very, very scary for black. Like his king is super exposed, but white actually doesn't have any way of making progress here. And white occasionally has to worry about his own back rank, so it's hard for him to ever move his queen or rook off of the first rank there. And so this is something that both players should know very well. And this is why you kind of need to know a lot of theory when you play these lines, because there's a couple of different drawing lines, but this should just be an equal position here. So in the game that we're looking at here, not the main line, but instead after the exchange. So not bishop to h6. In this game, queen to d4. Okay, so we are threatening your bishop on e6. All right. And now, what to do? Okay. Now white will, in this position, harass the rook a little bit. So, okay, we don't want to just give back the exchange. And it looks like white's very close to just getting that rook. But black does have one saving move here. He does have a way to save his rook. And that's the move e5, which is nice for black in a certain way. One, it gives the rook the e7 square. And it does solidify some of these dark squares around his king. So in that respect, it's really good. It doesn't make any sense here to take on Basant because the rook will just take, and you are just down in exchange, so you do want to keep some stuff on the board here. You don't want to ever be in a position where you might trade queens. So the queen goes back to f2, where it might make an appearance over on the king side if white ever gets an attack going. And what is interesting about this game is that these two players played the year before in 2007, and in that game, white played the only move that had been played at that time, which, after the rook escapes, is the move f4. So we'll look at the game from 2008, where bishop to d3 was an improvement, and it was a novelty at the time, so we're on move 20, and finally there's a novelty, so this is a very theoretical variation. But we'll take just a very brief look at f4, which is sort of white's main idea. He's going to open the f-file so he can get his queen and rook going. And just to show briefly what happened in this game, they reached a very equal position. Some scary stuff is happening. But white eventually ended up winning this game. He found the really nice maneuver at just the right time. This knight came to f6, which black allowed, and that ultimately led to his demise. But okay, so he decided now in 2008 he was going to play the move bishop to d3, which is an improvement. So before he plays f4, he gets his bishop out of the way just to make sure there's no queen to b6 attacking his bishop in the future. And on his next move now, he's going to play f4, and he's going to get a very similar position. And let's check it out. All right, so again, black takes control over c4. That's his big plan in all of these lines. So the knight c4 is coming soon. And f4. So White's coming through on the king side. Will black get enough counterplay on the queen side? Knight to c4. And white decides he's going to open up the f-file. Okay. And, all right, there's three ways that you can take here. The worst would be with the pawn, because what would black play here? We'll ask the audience. So it's a simple move. Does anyone see what white would play? Yeah. Bishop d5? G5, right. Yeah, so this would win some material. You can take with the rook or the knight. They're both relatively equal. So he took with the knight, a very tricky move. You are attacking the bishop. You might be thinking of going to g4, forking some pieces. But it's white's turn, and he gets to make a threat. So he is threatening checkmate on g7. And somehow black needs to get the bishop out of the way to stop that threat. So bishop takes d5. And it's funny, in this position, I was showing this to a friend of mine, and I said, of course, black can just bail out with a check in this position, and he couldn't find the check, which I thought was kind of unusual. So who can find a check here? We'll see how easy we can make the questions tonight. Because there's a decently high-rated player that couldn't find the check here. Yeah. Queen b7?
Queen b7. Oh, black.
Yeah. Oh, the computer gave it away. Yeah, so this would be the check that he could force the trade of queens here. Very good. But of course, you're still up in exchange, but the fact that now your 2-to-1 majority over on the queen side has kind of been shattered. It's not going to be very easy for either side to make a lot of progress here, but it was a very possible continuation. But instead, bishop takes d5. All right, so white took back. And now you kind of got to play bishop to g4. But let's blunder for a minute. What happens if we take this bishop? So there's actually 3 moves that will win fairly easily, but one is the strongest. So again, I asked the audience, what would white play here? All right, yeah, here, there, here. All right, somebody's working it out. All right, and there's more than one answer here, but the strongest move, do you know it? G6? D6, excellent. Yeah, this is the strongest move in the position, so good. The rook's attacked, and in a position like this, white would be able to check the king, and after rook to f8, you're going to take all of black's pieces. So this would be a catastrophe for black here. But, okay. So wisely, the knight went to g4, attacking the queen, and now he's going to be able to pick up that pesky bishop on h6, which is really an annoying piece. So the queen can go anywhere where she protects the bishop, and then this trade was made. So, okay. Now, the most obvious move is the best. But I guess black made a miscalculation here. And the obvious move is just to take this pawn on d5. And so if black would have found this move, it's very likely the game would have ended in a draw eventually, because, I mean, this is just a very playable position for both sides. For example, if he does play knight f4, we can throw this check in. Black could play a move like rook to f7 with a devious threat. The threat is queen takes bishop, exploiting the pin. And, okay, so white should protect the bishop, attack the rook. Black moves the rook to safety. Now he is threatening. Rook takes f4. White would have to play a move like g3. And this position should be relatively equal here. It's hard to see either side winning when you got 2 super grandmasters playing. But instead, after the queen took back, black decided to play the move queen to b6 check. So not taking the pawn. I assume in this position, this is what he saw in his head. He must have only calculated trading queens, which does probably produce a relatively equal endgame. And the rook should be able to put enough pressure on the d pawn to eventually win it. And the draw is the most likely result here. But I assume this is the move he must have missed. White has a very strong move here that gives him a very serious advantage. Were you going to say something? Okay. And that move is queen to h4, just keeping contact with the rook on e7. So now you can't take the bishop because you'll drop your rook. And black compounded his troubles by moving his rook, hoping maybe to take the e-pawn, hoping maybe to take the bishop. But white continued to find the best moves here, and after queen to f6, white is completely winning. Black is in a lot of trouble. We got some pretty big threats. In the game, he went back to e8. It's worth noting, you might be here, okay, black really wants to trade the queens because things are starting to look scary. But here the continuation would probably have been like this. And a simple move here is just very strong. Again, d6. So black had a chance to take that d pawn, but in this variation, the pawn really would have got active. It's going to go to d7 soon, and it's going to cause a lot of problems for the second player. But okay, so he went all the way back. And all right, now a relatively simple tactic occurred. So you may want to pause your videos. It's nothing overly brilliant. But in this position, bishop takes g6. So getting rid of all the pawns in front of the black king. And now checkmate is just around the corner here. So the game finished up with its check. And as I always teach my students, white did find the most accurate and best way to continue this, which is very important. It makes the whole game look more artistic. The best move here was played. And now after this, if you go up to h6, then my rook gets to come in. Rook to f6 would be played. So you have to go back. And after knight to f4, black resigned. This knight is just coming in to g6. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. The computer wants you to just sack your queen for the knight. Yeah, so you're in a lot of trouble here. Mate has come in, so in this position, he did indeed just give it up. Okay, so that's just a little brief introduction into the Grunfeld Defense, and thank you guys for coming.